RC from the Mountaintop Joiner Shop here. What you're about to witness is the story of how this big sexy beast of a workbench came to be. When I got into woodworking, I needed a workbench on a budget. After spending time researching, I decided on my own hybridized version of the newfangled workbench from Fine Woodworking magazine, issue 139. The top was a solid core wooden door with a layer of maple laminated over it and a crochet hook added on. The front of the bench legs had dog holes into which I could insert a long tray to support my work for edge planing into the crochet. While it got me by, there were a number of aspects to this bench that left me underwhelmed. Instead of some version of the newfangled workbench, I ended up with something more like a new mangled workbench. When drilling the dog holes in the top, I discovered that the solid core wooden door was anything but. It was basically filled with loosely glued particle board. This meant that my holdfasts were more likely to wallow out the hole than hold anything fast. This also allowed the bench to flex, somewhat trampoline-like, during chopping operations unless I positioned the workpiece over one of the legs. While the crochet hook and the adjustable height tray got me by nicely for edge planing, there were a whole host of hand tool operations that are made easier by having a front vise. The amount of time I spent improvising a way to hold a workpiece instead of just clamping it in a vise was a perpetual annoyance. I should have just spent the money. I could have tried to add one later, but with that so-called solid core wooden door benchtop, I didn't have a solid place for mounting one. The bench is also the scene of the worst measurement error I've ever made in my life. One that escaped my notice until after I glued it up. The stretchers, where they attach to the front right leg, are a full inch, higher than all the others. This made the leg kick out at an angle that was no longer perpendicular to the top and made it rock on the floor, requiring a wedge to be placed under one leg to level it. I could make an explanation as to how I made this error, but a decade later, the wounds are still too fresh. It was also too damn light to stay in one place. It wouldn't stay very flat because of this thing called wood movement that I didn't know very much about at the time, and it was a bit too high for hand planing efficiently. And let's face it wasn't very attractive either. As my woodworking hobby / full-time obsession slowly developed into a part-time woodworking career / full-time obsession, it became clear that I could no longer abide by this new mangled workbench of mine, and I resolved to do something about it when the time and budget allowed. That turned out to be another 2 or 3 years. But that did give me time to research and reflect on what it was I really wanted in a workbench. In Christopher Schwartz's definitive book on workbenches, he issued a caution to invent nothing. And I don't believe I did. I just combined time-tested elements from several different workbench designs into a design of my own. My design criteria were as follows. As a heavy user of hand tools, it needed to be heavy and solid. No moving, no flexing, no rocking. It needed to have a leg vise. I tend to build large pieces of furniture made from large pieces of wood. The leg vise handles them nicely. Of course, any vise is better than no vise, but a leg vise was ideal in my mind. It needed to be a knockdown design in case I ever needed to move it to another shop without endangering some poor mover's spine. It needed to stay flat once I flattened it. Flattening workbenches is a pain, and I would rather not do it any more than absolutely necessary. It needed to look nice, but not jewelry nice. I mean, I planned on using the hell out of this bench, so any jewelry-like qualities would be wasted on me. That said, I did want something I wasn't embarrassed to show to friends, let alone prospective clients. So what did all of these wants and desires translate to in a workbench design, made especially for myself? I ended up with a bench that had a thick top like a Roubeau, of brick-laid construction like the H.O. Studley bench. That's right, Studley made a sweet workbench too. And with an angled leg vise like a Nicholson, among other things. Now, if you're still watching this, you're probably a woodworker and will likely continue to watch as I dive into the minutiae that follows. Otherwise, you've been warned. To have a bench that is heavy and stiff, I needed a wood of decent heft that had a relatively high modulus of elasticity, which is a metric that defines a wood's resistance to bending. I also needed a wood that is tolerably workable with hand tools, readily available in the needed dimensions, and not prohibitively expensive. I also didn't want to spend an eternity trying to hand rip flat sawn boards into strips that I could turn on edge and laminate into a quarter/rift sawn benchtop, like is so often done in woodworking magazines by people with woodworking machines. In my area, that wood happened to be Douglas fir. Paxton Lumber in Denver had tons of this stuff in perfectly knot-free, quartered, rift-sawn 2x8s, properly dried and dead flat to start with for a reasonable price, especially for such a unicorn-like construction lumber. The problem I had with Douglas fir, other than that it's stringy and splintering and a pain in the ass to cross-cut with handsaws, is its unsatisfactory durability for a bench surface. While the late wood is plenty hard, the early wood is incredibly soft. You can dent it with a fingernail. This meant finding a complementary wood that I could laminate to the surface that was of moderate durability and heft, yet hand tool friendly. That wood happened to be quarter sawn sapele. Again, Paxton usually had tons of it. It's heavy, workable, of moderate hardness, and available in absurd widths. I could laminate nearly the full width of the bench with just 2 boards. And not only that, but the boards I found were quite flat to start, which isn't always the case after you bring a tropical wood to a dry climate like this. I had to wonder, would the sapele and the Doug fir play nice together, or would they be in a constant tug-of-war with each other as the humidity changed? To find out, I looked up their shrinkage rates, and because they were both quarter/rift sawn, I was particularly keen to know their tangential shrinkage rates. Lo and behold, they are listed as 7.2% and 7.3% respectively, practically identical. Not only that, but the late wood of Doug fir is very similar in color to that of sapele, though they are certainly contrasting woods. They aren't jarringly so. The final caution against a wood like sapele for a bench top is its dark color, the theory being that it might make for a darker working environment to see in. I plan to alleviate this concern by plugging in another electric light. As it turns out, they are found in many stores in my area and increasingly affordable and efficient. I like big vices, and I cannot lie. Other woodworkers can't deny. When a face vise racks on its itty-bitty guides and has lousy capacity, you get annoyed. I'd already been annoyed enough with my work holding options, so I opted for a leg vise. From screw to bench top is about 7.5 inches, which is already pretty good. But if I angle the vise at 20 degrees like on some of the classic English workbenches, I can clamp a workpiece that reaches all the way down to the floor. And because the center line of the vise chop crosses the face of the workpiece at 20 degrees, it won't even rack. And unlike a twin screw, I can clamp a wide board horizontally the full length of the bench without interference. The other thing that appealed to me about the angled leg vise is that it allowed knee clearance while standing next to or edge planing into it. As for what brand of leg vise, I hemmed and hawed for an eternity on this one. In my confused wanderings on the interwebs, I happened upon a quick-release leg vise. Yeah, a quick-release leg vise, made by Hovarder Custom Vise. The few vices I've used all had threaded screws and took a moment to tighten up. I'm an impatient person in this regard. I have not a moment to spare. So despite not having a ton of information to go on, I ordered one up. This thing doesn't have a threaded screw at all, but instead relies on some kind of black magic to smoothly slide in and out, and is tightened with less than a full turn on the wheel. I had to take it apart during installation, which is surprisingly easy by the way, and I still don't know how it works. But it works, and it works well. And it's as entertaining to operate as a good card trick. For a parallel guide, I went with a pinless chain style guide from Ancora Yacht Service. Again, this product is quite unique to the market, but especially as someone who formerly made a living in the cycling industry, it's elegantly simple to install and use. I basically drilled a bunch of holes, screwed in some metal brackets, threaded a chain through all of it, and adjusted the chain tension to dial in the proper toe-in on the vise chop. Done. No bending over to place a pin in the parallel guide necessary, and no excavating huge mortises for a crisscross style guide, which I understand doesn't always play well with an angled leg vise anyways. Some woodworkers will only drill a dog hole in their workbench if they absolutely have to, as if afraid to cause it pain. Not me. I have it on good authority that workbenches don't have any feelings, and as such, I lean very much toward the Swiss cheese approach. Dog holes, and lots of them, are very useful to me. I made a sliding dead man and ran it on a piece of aluminum angle nailed to the stretcher with roofing nails. I did this because it was much easier than the wooden alternative, smoother operating, and I thought it looked cool to match the other hardware. The sliding dead man has a split personality, one of which forgot to drink its V8 and leans at the same angle as the leg vise. This allows me to tuck it in under the leg vise and support a workpiece on it before clamping for an extra solid hold that can handle all the downward chopping and pounding I can dish out without sliding through even a little bit. I made the removable slats that form the lower shelf from the same sapele as the top, because it too should be durable and look nice. Much like one Jeffrey Lebowski's rug, I think it really ties the bench together. I used split short stretchers for the sake of not only rigidity, but to allow a path for the chain guide to pass through. On the right side, no such path was necessary, so I added a bottom to them and created a little tray for storing things in. I didn't use it for much other than glue bottles, but it's there. Feel free to ask me how I feel about it later, but this is the bench I've been dreaming about for years, and then using for years, and to me it's worthy of all its superlatives in the English language and then some. If you think it's ugly or stupid, that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. Ultimately, you're not the boss of me. I do what I want. And what I want, my dear viewer, is to make tons of inspired quality custom furniture on a beautiful, reliable workbench that bears my maker's mark and is a joy to use. Thank you for watching. Now, if you like what you saw here, please hit like and subscribe. It would help me out a lot. Also hit the little bell icon if you want to be notified anytime I release a new video. And if you didn't like what you saw here, keep it to yourself, pal. Or watch one of my other videos. You might like one of those. Thank you for watching.